What's up, basketball fans? Guess what? Yep, it's that time of year again. The NBA is back. From opening tip-off to buzzer beaters, BetOnline has got you covered with the best odds, biggest promotions, live in-game betting on all of your favorite teams. This season, every single game matters. BetOnline has got every single stat, matchup, breakdown. They've got live odds to bet on during the game. And it's not just the NBA. BetOnline has odds on everything from football to MLB playoffs, NHL. We've even got political props. That's right. Rams are set to play the Seahawks this week. It is going to be an all-important game. Please get in your bets. Head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline. The game starts here. Welcome to Believe in Rams. I'm Erin Coscarelli. I'm so stoked. I can't even begin to tell you why. But make sure when you're listening, we've got so many cool, even earlier episodes. Check out the archives. You've got Siciliano. We've had Adam Schefter on, Ian Rappaport, and my girl, Jourdan Rodrigue. She has her finger on the pulse when it comes to all things Rams. I'm so happy that you're taking the time to join us today, especially in such a crazy time of the season right now. You're the senior writer for The Athletic. You're creator of the Playcallers and Finding Rams. And I also really love that you're on NFL Daily Podcasts for NFL Network and Heed the Call podcast. You're everywhere, Jourdan. Thank you so much for making the time. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so glad to be on with you. It's been an exciting year so far. And I love being busy. And luckily the Rams are a team that good, bad, there is no in between. It's all chaos, either for the better or for the worse all the time. So they're always interesting. So I'm glad to be on with you today to talk about them.
Yeah, and I remember too in the beginning of the season, like the storylines were rampant just because we were looking at a team that went to the playoffs last year in another unique way, which I want to get to. We'll get to the Rams in a moment. But then now they have to do it without Aaron Donald, without their DC. Their DC goes to Atlanta. And there were so many ripe storylines about Sean McVay, and now he's a new dad, and Matthew Stafford's contract, and all of these things were playing a role in what was this team going to actually look like. How long for you, Jourdan, have you been covering the Rams?
So I'm going into my 5th year, and I came over right at the beginning of lockdown when the COVID restrictions were on the building. And so I started actually covering them remotely, and then so got to know a lot of the people I still keep up with now over the phone and connecting with them that way, and then moving finally out to LA in July, driving across the country with my dog and just really, it changed my life covering this team. And I know that I, sound a bit like a golden retriever when I talk sometimes about my experience here, but the interesting elements of how they think about football collectively as an organization. And again, whether times are good, bad, there's never an in-between since the Jeff Fisher days, but whether good, bad, or bad, there's always something to learn, and they're always pushing in football. And that's something that has absolutely changed my life and the way that I am able to think about and conceptualize football as well. So it's been a ride.
Yeah. And it's awesome. Like, I feel very fortunate that I get to cover the Rams, because I always say sports is a microcosm for life, and how Sean McVay talks to his guys in the locker room is sometimes how we have to talk to ourselves when we're facing adversity. And this team is no shortage of having to deal with a lot of adversity. I had mentioned earlier that the team struggled last year, going 3-6 and then finishing 7-1 and then going to the postseason. Does last year and now sort of where you see this team at this year, is it annoying to compare the two, or do you feel like there's an actual comparison here?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there is a comparison. And honestly, I think that starts with the head coach, because let's not forget a couple of years ago when Sean McVay was like on top of the world, right? And his teams would start really, really fast out of the gate, and then they would sort of fizzle out in November. And this was the pattern. They would kick the door down with some new concept, some new scheme, some new idea. And then they would have really tough stretches in the middle of the season, including their Super Bowl year where they lost every game in November. And now what we're looking at after he went through personally what he went through, the burnout and questioning, his purpose, and doing the work to put himself back together as a coach and as a person, Now you're looking at the inverse of those teams where they do struggle and they openly, obviously struggle, right? Just the same way that he did. And instead, what they do is they put the pieces back together and they continue to build little steps and take little steps and they do the work. And Aaron Donald taught him a phrase a couple years ago when he was going through a hard time: work works. And, you know, I know everyone wants to laugh about coaching cliches, whatever. This one is real because every single person in 2023 internalized that because he kept repeating it, kept that mantra going. And this team has always been a reflection of where he's at and who he is as the head coach. And I think it's a credit and testament to the caliber of coach that he is. But when you see now, these are teams of substance. These are teams that can run the ball. They're not just getting the style points by Matthew Stafford throwing it all over the yard and then his arm falling off in November. They can run the ball in November and December when they're healthy. They can do it through a lot of different ways. They're literally built to survive through adversity. I don't think that's an accident.
Yeah. Well, and you speak about the adversity and you posted this on X. You're an amazing follow, by the way. Follow Jourdan Rodrigue on X. I always want to call it Twitter, but you posted this and you said before the bye, Stafford was pressured 65 times and sacked 16 in 2 games after against tough defenses, no less. That Vikings defense loves to pressure. They love to blitz. He was pressured 13 and sacked once. How do you why? Because, you know, I think the big thing that we would always say is that this team is not a bad team. Colin Cowherd talked about it on his podcast. They were just an injured team.
Yeah.
They're still dealing with injuries despite the fact that you saw both Puka and Cooper out there. Why is this offensive line, who's still missing some key pieces, why are they putting it together right now, you think?
Well, they're not panicking, first of all. I mean, they went into the bye and right tackle Rob Havenstein, he's the only one left from the St. Louis team, and he's a team captain. He's someone Sean has leaned on over the last few years, really, especially after Andrew Whitworth retired, as that voice of reason, although he's very blunt. So you have to get used to that in the initial phases. But I have this mantra, anytime I really want to know what's going on with the Rams, what the vibe is, what the ethos is, how they feel, whether they're panicking or not, I go talk to Rob Havenstein at his locker because he'll tell it to you like it is. And that is exactly what had happened over the bye. Was he and Sean McVay sat down and it was sort of this question, okay, do you continue to move guys around on this offensive line, or do you find somebody and even though they're untested and unproven, you stick with them? And enter Justin Dedich, the undrafted rookie free agent who was most recently Caleb Williams center at USC and now is starting at left guard for the Rams. And he and the rookie Bo Limmer, who's been at center since the injuries in the Detroit game, they've kept at it with them. They didn't panic. They didn't go out and make different moves. They said, okay, these are guys that if they just play together for a little bit of time, if we also help them out, if we get them interior chippers with Kyren Williams picking up some of that interior pressure. You saw him doing that against the Vikings, looking for anybody to block on the inside. If you give the outside guys help and force the pressure to kind of cup around Matthew Stafford versus penetrate straight through, if you are able to just divert, play the quick game a little bit in some ways, Stafford really had to be a game manager against the Raiders. It was such an ugly win. They were just playing to win the game and to mitigate pressure at that point. Every single time, though, that you believe in a plan and you stick with it and you also help those guys collectively who need some snaps to play together, they do start building those snaps. Games like the last 2 games, particularly against these defenses, they do build confidence. That does build belief. Right. And then you can start expanding things. And you saw this against the Vikings. Justin Dedich is not their body type for a guard anymore. Used to be the perfect prototype for that outside zone stuff that Sean McVay used to love to run. But now they're like a gap duo team, so they're really big on the inside, but he's not. But what do they do with him instead of saying, okay, well, we're going to still try to do this, and maybe it's not your strength? They run screens in his direction, and he gets downfield and he blocks them out. I mean, I just think that they're adjusting to maximize their people up front and bide their time for Steve Avila and potentially Jonah Jackson to return. And that's good coaching, and that's collaboration from the entire team and the coaching staff.
Yeah, and you see that those guys like will run through a wall for McVay after post game. In the locker room, you get to see parts of his, post game speech when he's given the game ball, and you see, like you mentioned, the ethos. These guys coming together, being tested week in and week out. I want to get to what you saw in the Vikings game, but before that, I did want to talk to you because you mentioned after that Raiders game, the defense looked good. I mean, the defense got propped up in a way that they sort of needed that confidence building against a backup in, Gardner Minshew. And that was one of my biggest issues. I was like, look, the Raiders are not what the Vikings look like right now. So just because they eked out a win doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see something on Thursday night. And I was totally wrong. In fact, actually, my buddy, I'm so embarrassed to admit this, asked me, should I start Puka and we're a co-captain on a fantasy football team. And I said, no, he's probably going to be on a snap count, pitch count.
The same. Yeah, I thought
right.
The same. Yeah.
I mean, I gave him, I think he scored 17 points. I mean, it was like, I was mortified, but I just didn't expect to see this team come out and rock out the way that they did against this Vikings team that, yes, granted, they got a loss against the Lions, but it's the Lions. So with this team and those two wins, would we be having a different conversation when it comes to the trade deadline if they lost against the Vikings? Because remember, obviously, Cooper Kupp was like up for discussion. Even Stafford was being discussed. Do you foresee that we would be having a very different conversation about some of those guys potentially leaving in the event that this team lost?
Yeah, I 100% think that we're having a very different discussion. I'm not coming on the show with all sunbeams and positive energy. I'm like, guys, buckle in. Like it could be a totally different conversation right now, because the reality of this, and it's not a bad thing for those listening, it's just what it is. This is a team with one foot in the door of its new era, which is a draft and develop, a lot of young players coming in and playing key roles on this team in all three phases on cheap contracts. And that is the new era that they have very quickly entered following that disastrous 2022 season, nailing the last two draft classes and really getting a lot of those guys on the field, whether through accident with injuries to other guys or through intention. And you're seeing that start to pay off, right? On the other side, they still have the other foot, sort of straddling into their previous era, where you do have aging stars, and they are stars. When they turn it on, it's hard to argue with what they can add to this roster. But you see that era like just very slowly starting to end. And that's okay. That's football. But the decision between winning the next, those last two games, and also, while I believe them when they say, no, we're not trading Cooper Kupp, I do believe that at this point. And that Minnesota win had a huge amount to do with that. Yeah. But, this Seahawks game is also going to be really important, not necessarily for the trade deadline, but for the hope of the season. So, but when you have those wins, you can maybe say, okay, like we understand that maybe after this year, we're having this conversation again. What era are we going to enter? Are we going to go into this new era now? Are we going to try to creak out another year of this older one, depending on a lot of variables, health and whatnot. And so I think you have the conversation, like, could we get one last ride? Like, could we really do this? Could we go out like in a blaze of glory and push as hard as we can and just hit full effing send and see how far we can get? And I think that's what those last two games, particularly that Minnesota game, I think that's what that game was symbolic of, is blaze of glory is possible, right? And if you see that is possible, then you maybe can delay those significant roster altering decisions that you probably are going to have to make in the offseason.
Well, and that was what was so crazy, right? It was like this team, the Vikings, now they're on a 2-game losing streak, and people are talking about the Vikings as though they're not a real team. And it's so interesting because every week there's a different storyline based on the result and what this could look like. Blades of glory, and I'm grateful as someone who gets to cover the Rams, that it's always interesting each and every week, and Sean McVay makes it interesting. And this team is still very much in contention. Do you see them being active at all during trade deadline? And if so, in what way?
I don't. I mean, I look at maybe like a Joe Noteboom, for example, who's been really solid depth for them. I look and he just, he might not get on the field again with Justin Diedich, but he still is a valuable depth player. They've got some linemen coming back later down the road. So you just kind of look at extra guys in this case. I look at, we love the flashes of potential that we see from Tutu Atwell. We just haven't seen a lot of it consecutively, other than when players are injured. Sean McVay has just had a hard time getting him on the field in a significant role, even though he is such an explosive player. So I look at guys who are on contracts. I look at things like that are maybe now that some people have returned, some players have returned, maybe you're the extra player in the conversation. At the same time, it wouldn't surprise me. I think we always have to think about the Rams as, like, again, a potential for chaos team, because they just have showed us that in the past. And you never know what Les Snead is going to do. But so we have to be ready for any scenario all the time, always, regardless of what they say, in public. But at the same time, this is, to me, because they won in a fashion that showed that what they're still capable of. They didn't just squeak out that Minnesota win. And yes, the face mask was awful. But like overall, this offense looked, as the kids say, so back. And this defense is starting to look really, really good. In October, they played like a top 10 defense. This is a group that had to develop and get better week over week, make personnel adjustments. They had to be flexible. Krishula was. And so I do think that the pieces are coming together. And when that happens, and you don't necessarily have any gaping holes anywhere at a one spot, you could at a 2 or a 3 in different places, but at a one spot, when you don't have any gaping holes, you often see those teams stand pat and roll with that group down the stretch.
Yeah. As the kids say, the Rams are a vibe right now. That's for sure. I want to get into real quick about the Seahawks, but before that, Kyren has certainly emerged as the big star of this offense, certainly carrying the torch, if you will, or bearing the shoulder of the weight of having the wide receivers not available necessarily. Do you feel like there's a comparison that you see in Kyren with another kind of running back, either in the league or a former running back that used to play? Is there a style of his game that you resembles somebody else?
I know that there's a lot of heartbeat running backs, and that's kind of where I would categorize him. Like, he's a heartbeat running back. And what I mean by that is, like, that just makes everything flow. That makes everything work. The energy can inspire other people. The energy can, when he is on, it's similar to how you feel when Matthew Stafford is on. You feel that ability to potentially make a huge impact in a game. You feel that attention to detail, that play energy, and he lifts up the linemen around him and all of that. So when he's on, he definitely is that person. I think it's like all but 4 touchdowns the Rams scored this season are Kyren Williams touchdowns, right? Like, everyone needs to maybe step it up a little bit, frankly, but like, that's a great Kyren stat. One thing he's going to do, win or lose, is get his touchdown and keep his streak alive. But I don't know that I would compare him specifically 1-to-1 with anybody else, but I would say that he does fall into that category of players who, when they're on the field, you have a chance. And when they're on the field, you can really significantly feel how different it would be to not have that player. Because of just sort of like that master key functionality that helps all the other pieces fit together.
Yeah. And that's why it's so scary when all the guys are out on the field, like you mentioned, Tutu, or even, Jordan Whittington, who was the preseason darling. Would you say that this Rams wide receiver room is the most dangerous in the NFL with those guys back?
I don't know that I would say it's the most dangerous. I do think that it is very clear, like, how all of the little pieces matter with everybody healthy, because it activates so much. It's basically like the difference between, and this is more metaphorical. This isn't like actual, but if I were going to like paint a picture, it's like Sean McVay being able to hold like a King James Museum, like, Bible, right, in his hands for his playbook, or a Xeroxed one sheet, Like that's the difference of having Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua and Kyren Williams and Matthew Stafford all healthy at the same time versus not. Their EPA per play goes from last in the league to top 5. We saw that last year. The touchdown production goes from their red zone production even goes from last in the league to up near the top. Their offense in general just works because it's designed to work that way. And that's the double-edged sword of this is when they are healthy and those receivers are activated in the run game as well as the passing game, as well as the hybrid sort of tight end fullback role that they do play. Those types of things open up this entire offense in a very real way. However, you also have spent the last couple of years building that offense around players who have missed time through the course of every season. So that's the double-edged sword here, but it's almost like you take the wrong edge of that sword because you know how diverse and complex and multiple that the good side of that can be. It can lead the league. It can kick the door down, but it's the collective that works together, less so one specific element.
Yeah. And, one of the things that you had mentioned was the defense and the evolution of what that team looks like. And my question to you was, as a reporter covering the team, knowing they're not going to get Aaron Donald back, how skeptical were you feeling about what this Rams defense was going to look like with Chris Shula now promoted and no Aaron Donald in the building, knowing how important he was to the ethos of the locker room, certainly for the defensive side of the ball. How did you feel about it when we started this season? And how do you see how they've evolved now? Because some of the young guys really making a lot of plays, especially in the secondary the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it was interesting because, like everybody, I was like, ooh, what is this going to be? You're missing the, Hall of Famer, one of the, in my opinion, top 10 best football players of any position of all time. And now he's gone. And now you have to account for, basically being able to play with 14 guys on defense. And now you just have 11, like normal. And so, I was skeptical. And then I would go out to these training camp practices and it was so clearly not what those young guys were thinking about. They were just thinking about playing football and they were just thinking about problem solving and talking trash to each other and all of these things that were really organic. And I think I spent a lot of time at the beginning of the season trying to figure out what is Chris Shula's identity as a defensive coach, as a play caller. I don't know it at that time. I'm thinking, I don't know it. And here this guy is with this enormous task. And I don't even really know schematically, philosophically, what he's all about. And then I started realizing that over time, and especially as he's made these very quiet adjustments that make a huge impact. First, it came with the front with Kobe Turner playing back more nose tackle, being super dynamic there and still getting pressure above a league average rate. And then it came from how they're starting to move Braden Fisk, Bobby Brown, Michael Hoyt, how some of those really versatile guys are starting to rotate almost like they're orbiting a sun, if the sun is Kobe Turner, kind of how everything is revolving around that. Then he took attention to the backside of the defense. And, Trey White, you had to start benching him because you could tell he just wasn't ready to play yet. The Achilles was still clearly affecting him. Getting Darius Williams back and then moving Quentin Lake to a place of communication in the secondary, which took that takes a big person in Quentin Lake to play a less activated role. If you're the star, you're in the mix on every play. Whereas if you're the deep safety, you're not necessarily in the mix on every play, but you are in charge of getting everyone in the mix on any given play. And then some of the changes they made at linebacker, those types of things. Watching this defense come alive, I kind of started to understand, okay, I get it. Chris Shula's the setup guy. And I think sometimes the best coaches or coaches who really do have it or have a future in the league are setup guys where you can't really figure them out in terms of okay, what's your thing? What's your flair? Are you a scheme guy? Are you a physicality guy? No, he's setting up his players for success. He's setting them up in efficient positions according to their skill sets. That's not asking certain players, other than when they're very limited personnel, inclusive to inside linebacker, but when they're not asking them to play outside of everything that they can achieve. And if they can't do those things, then they're off the field. And another person steps in and another thing is rotated and a little piece is moved there and there. And maximizing those players to where it's no one player doing everything at once. It's a collective being set up in a bunch of different ways. And so I'm like, okay, that's interesting. The Rams have not had that here. They've had incredibly dynamic defensive play callers, incredibly aggressive defensive play callers, incredibly smart, possibly above their time before they got into a huge old mess in the other team down the street, defensive play callers. But they haven't really had like a setup guy. And I think that's what Chris Shula is. And I think him finding that identity as well as the entire defense really growing together and bonding in a real way on the field and off the field and communicating better. I think those things have made the difference for this group.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like they've needed to. It's the only way that they could survive is, and the thing that's interesting is Trey White, you tweeted it, that he is exploring or he's interested in exploring trade options out of LA. What can you break down? Sean McVay had said he wants to potentially keep him. What was the breakdown? Why is that happening?
Yeah, so I think the Rams should earn their criticism on this front because when they signed Trey White, they very openly expressed that like they don't expect him on the field until November because he was coming off the Achilles and, to a T, from the coaching staff to the front office. Like, we don't need Trey White to be everything for us now. We need him on the field in November. Like, that's almost a direct quote from so many people in that building. And then they had these injuries and Tre'Davious Williams goes out with the hamstring. But the key factor here was, and then first Darian Kendrick has the ACL in training camp, and then Tre'Davious Williams has the hamstring, and Jerry Jacobs, the depth corner that they signed, did not work out, and had an injury as well. And the key factor here is that they delayed too long, and then going to pick up Ahkello Witherspoon, who they were very familiar with from last year, but who was not with the team in the spring or the summer. Well, when you're not playing football, you got to pick back up playing football in terms of the specific conditioning. Like, you can be as in shape as you want, but if you're not running around doing football movements on a team, a team cannot put you on the field until you're ready to go, particularly if you're a veteran player. And so that little delay, that gap in Ahkello being ready, not through his fault, through the fact that the Rams delayed on bringing him back into the mix, that little gap, that was where Trey White had to play way more snaps than he was expecting to at the start of the year, than the Rams were expecting him to at the start of the year. And that's when you start to get overcompensation. You start to do things with your technique that lead to PI fouls because you're overcompensating for the fact that you're not moving to where you really need to be moving or can move at that point because you still were supposed to have time to get there. So that's where I think the Rams deserve criticism. But I also think that the way that Trey White has handled this entire situation deserves a ton of praise because he has been like absolutely the total teammate, lifting up Kobe Durant. Like, I don't know that Kobe Durant breaks out the way that he does if he weren't surrounded with Tre'Davious Williams, with Ahkello, with Trey White acting the way that he is in such a positive affirmation way, because Kobe needed the confidence. He hadn't gotten his hands on the ball a lot since, earlier a couple years ago. And he really wanted that badly. So it's like you could either go the direction of overthinking it and overplaying technique and leading to big breakdowns, or you can really stay grounded within yourself the way that these veterans were talking to Kobe about doing, and you can play your technique and the ball will come to you. And that's what happened. So it's like, Trey White could potentially be moved to another team. I do believe McVay when he says like he wants to keep him. I think he's a great presence for the locker room. And, down the stretch, they might need him. That's
right.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's like, I think they fumbled this really. Yeah. But at the same time, it could still work out for everybody. But, if you're Trey White, you definitely want to get on the field, especially if you're feeling like this is now more in accordance with your timeline.
Right. Yeah. And it's it's a bummer because, I think there's a lot of question marks, even though the NFC West, the Rams aren't looking great right now. I think there's so much potential for what this team could potentially look like moving forward. And speaking of that, and I want to be respectful of your time, the Seahawks. I feel like we keep saying each and every week, this is an all important win. This is a
Yes.
must win. Like it's
is.
the Raiders. It's a must win.
Yeah.
It's the Vikings. It's a must win. But the Seahawks feels like this really is a must win. How important is this game against the Seahawks this week?
I mean, it's crucial to saving some face in the NFC West down the stretch, right? Because, I don't want to say their entire season hinges on the line, but it does feel like the collision between these two teams, they both need this badly. Seattle coming off sort of a catastrophe last week and really have been like sliding toward the negative for a couple of weeks now, despite all the talent that they have, new coaching staff, all of that gets tricky sometimes. But they need to, maintain their positioning in the NFC West. At the same time, the Rams kind of need this game in order to stay a threat in the NFC West. And that's what is so compelling about this is like, a lot of times Sean McVay and the Rams have owned this matchup. It's a bit of a wild card now with Mike McDonald. Mike McDonald. I did the same thing that everybody in the league does like 16 times. Mike McDaniel, Mike McDonald. But with Mike McDonald on the other side, like it's a little bit of a wild card in what this could be. You kind of knew what to expect from the Pete Carroll coach teams over time, but this is going to be a collision in a big way, not just because both teams will be pretty desperate to win this one, understanding the significance and the stakes.
Last question, and I promise, because we have to get, I know it's like, how crazy is it covering the Rams in the middle of the World Series too, by the way? Like, is that not
I know,
crazy
there's so many sports happening right now. Like it's been so exciting. The Freddie Freeman narrative, like, to write that story, Like,
there's so many weird synergies that are happening too with other teams from the past of the Dodgers. It really is. It's incredible. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been a fun week for LA because the USC won, Rams won, Dodgers are in it. The Rams were rated low on the Uncrustables list. What is your take on that? And is there a king of Uncrustables?
Okay, I have to say, the only reason the Rams were rated low on the Uncrustables list is because they did not count mine. So if they would have counted mine, they give these to us over ice in the press box every weekend. If they would have counted mine, I promise I could have brought this team a little bit of an edge in that competition. I got to tell you, it's like every day I walk in and I see somebody eating one, it's to me, it's like the most relatable thing ever. I'm like, you know what? That does sound good right now, actually. So I know I was a bit disappointed. I was like, come on, guys, get competitive out there. Like, get some Uncrustables going here.
So funny. They are really good, actually. You are incredible. You're so great. You have such a great, energy about you. You're so smart about the game. You know the Rams inside and out. And it's been a lot of fun hearing you and your takes on the Rams this season. Please follow her on X. You've got to check out her on podcasts. Heed the Call. So fun. NFL Daily. Jourdan Rodrigue, thank you from The Athletic. We are so grateful for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm honored. Thank you for having me. This was fun. We'll do it again. Keep up the great work. And thank you for covering the Rams in such a dynamic and awesome way, such a thorough way. I know people love listening to you, and I'm happy to join you anytime. So
thank you. Thank you, Jourdan. Appreciate it.